In the name of God, in whom we live and move and have our being. Amen. Please be seated. Look at all that beautiful green out there. This morning's reading from the Gospel of Luke is rather brief, but as is almost always the case, it's jam-packed with truth and meaning. And it's jam-packed with the meaning of truth. At least that's how I read it this time around. And I can't imagine why. We've certainly been hearing a lot about truth lately, about who's telling it and who isn't, about why they're telling it or about why they're not telling it, about who has it on their side and about whose side doesn't even seem to know what it is. If we watch Fox News, we're hearing constantly about fake news and alternative facts. If we watch CNN, we're hearing constantly about lies and self-serving manipulation of facts, about dishonesty and misleading untruths. And investigations. Have we ever before in history had so many people investigating so many people about so many things at so many times? And all because we're searching for the truth. And we suddenly don't seem to trust one another, to know the truth, or to speak the truth, or to live the truth. Sadly, and all current indications to the contrary, this isn't news, because it's not new. It's not at all new. In just a few weeks, during our annual observance of Holy Week, we will hear the words that Pontius Pilate is reported to have said to Jesus during his sham trial. What is truth? Indeed, what is truth? The answer to that question is the same now as it was then. As the trial scene with Pilate, who is representing both the political and the religious authority systems of that time and place, as the trial scene with Pilate so dramatically revealed, the truth was and is Jesus, the Christ. When he asked his famous question, what is truth? Pontius Pilate was looking right at it. He was actually standing face to face with truth. And apparently, he never saw it. He never saw it. So do we? Do we see the truth around us? And how exactly do we know the truth? What is truth? As always, Jesus shows us the way. At his trial and in this morning's gospel reading from Luke. Please remember that this is never just about Jesus. It's always about us as well. Jesus is God's stand-in for all of us. And he came to show us how it's done. When it's done the right way, when it's done God's way. The first line today is fascinating all by itself. We're told that some Pharisees came to Jesus to warn him that Herod intended to kill him. How interesting. Weren't the Pharisees always disagreeing with Jesus about some theological issue or another? Wasn't he always arguing with them about something? Weren't they always driving him crazy? Weren't the Pharisees Jesus' enemies? Yes, 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 and no. They did disagree with him and argue with him and drive him crazy, but they were not his enemies. They were not. They were the people within Jesus' own religious tradition who were stuck in a rather unspiritual and superficial understanding of the Judaism that they shared with Jesus. They weren't his enemies. So, point number one about the truth. Jesus spoke the truth without making enemies. Moving on with the story. Jesus responds with a rather strong and assertive smackdown to Herod. Go and tell that fox for me, Jesus said. I have God's mission to accomplish, which you apparently know nothing about, Herod, and when I'm finished, and only when I'm finished, I'll be on my way. Well now, Because of our English understanding of the word fox, we think that Jesus is actually saying that Herod is sly or sneaky. And that may well be the case. But in Hebrew and in Aramaic, the understanding of the word fox was different. It was like Jesus was saying, you go and tell that miserable, weak little man, Herod was rather crazy and ruthless, and he was a violent character who fancied himself to be in charge of everything, like the whole world. And Jesus is essentially calling him a weak, sniveling little wretch of a man who is in charge of nothing. Point number 2 about the truth. Jesus spoke truth to power. To power. And finally, Luke's telling of this story takes a really poignant turn. Luke has shown us Jesus going from teaching the religious authorities, the Pharisees, to righteous indignation against the political authorities, Herod, to profound heartache for the rest of us. For the rest of us. Jesus' cry from the heart says, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often I have desired to gather your children together, as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing. In Luke's telling of this story, we are told that Jesus wept as he spoke those words. Why would Jesus weep? Why would he cry out in anguish over people's stubborn and relentless refusal of God's grace and mercy and compassion? I mean, if most of us were in Jesus' position, we'd probably just blow up the whole mess or something, wouldn't we? I know I probably would, especially some days. Remember the other time in the Gospels where we hear that the disciples wanted to call down fire and destruction on people because they had refused something that Jesus had said? Remember that? Mm-hmm. I imagine some of us would probably think that was a really great idea. To heck with them, Jesus, let's just blow them all to hell. I can see some so-called Christians carrying a sign like that at a rally, right? Can't you? Let's just blow them all to hell, Jesus. And I imagine that they say that because they actually think that God is like that. How sad is that? Jesus very, very clearly showed us what God is like. Jesus didn't do any of that. In the other story, he rebuked the disciples. In today's story, he cried. His heart broke. And by standing there crying with a broken heart, Jesus revealed to us God's tears and God's broken heart. As much as we may sometimes think that we're making God angry, Jesus showed us that rather than getting angry with us, God weeps for us. And God's heart is broken for us. So a little aside, I can't end without pointing out the fact that the image that Jesus uses here in order to describe himself of a hen gathering her brood under her wings, that's a feminine image. A feminine image. It's a feminine image for Christ, and it's a feminine image for God. And it reflects the very first image for God that is revealed in the book of Genesis. In the story of creation, we're told that the Spirit of God hovered, the word is brooded, over the darkness and the chaos and the nothingness that would be created as everything. The language indicates a mother bird protecting and warming her eggs or her young chicks, which means that the very first image of God in the entire Bible is a feminine image of God. Just saying. I digress on purpose. Back to today's gospel. Jesus finishes this quite touching revelation of the very heart of God by saying, "How often I have desired to gather your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, but you were not willing. See, your house is left to you, and I tell you, you will not see me again until the time when you say, 'Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord.'" Point number 3 about truth. Jesus always spoke the truth in love. Always spoke the truth in love. So there you have it. Jesus is our example. Jesus shows us how it's done. Jesus did it, and we should do it too. We should speak the truth without making enemies. We should speak the truth to power. And we should always, always, always speak the truth in love. In love. Timely advice from Jesus, to be sure. So, what is truth? We know the answer, don't we? Amen.
Amen.